Lyra Ashworth had learned long ago that the best way to survive in the Kane Pack was to be invisible. She kept her head down, her voice soft, and her days filled with work that no one else wanted to do. She cleaned wounds. She mixed herbs. She sat beside sick children through long nights so their tired parents could rest. Nobody thanked her for it, but nobody stopped her either, and that was enough. 3 years earlier, she had stood in front of the whole pack, waiting for a bond that never came. Alpha Draven Kane's cousin, an alpha named Corin, had looked at her with cold, tired eyes and said the words that changed her life forever. He rejected her, right there in front of everyone, calling her weak and plain, unworthy of standing beside any alpha. The pack had laughed. Some had pitied her. Most had simply looked away, as if her pain was something embarrassing they did not want to witness. After that day, Lyra stopped hoping for anything grand. She found quiet purpose in the medical wing instead, healing people who never asked how she felt, only whether she could make the pain stop. She told herself this was enough. She almost believed it. On the night everything changed, Lyra was gathering herbs near the edge of the forest, far from the noise of the castle. The moon was thin, and the wind carried the smell of rain. She liked these quiet hours, when no one watched her, when she could simply exist without being measured and found lacking. That was when she heard it, a low, ragged breathing sound, coming from somewhere in the trees. At first, she thought it was an injured animal. She followed the sound carefully, her senses sharp, until she found him. Alpha King Draven Kane lay crumpled against the base of an old oak tree, his powerful body trembling, his skin pale and slick with sweat. Dark veins spread beneath his skin like cracks in stone. Lyra recognized the signs immediately. Wolfsbane poisoning, and a rare, aggressive strain of it. For one long moment, she simply stood there, staring down at the man whose family had humiliated her in front of everyone she knew. A small, bitter voice inside her whispered that she could walk away. No one would ever know she had found him. No one would blame her for leaving the king who let his cousin destroy her dignity without ever saying a word in her defense. But that voice did not last. Lyra had never been able to walk away from someone in pain, not even once in her life, and she was not about to start with him. She knelt beside Draven and got to work. She tore a strip of cloth from her sleeve to bind a bleeding wound at his side. She checked his pulse, found it dangerously slow, and understood there was no time to run for help. The poison was already spreading toward his heart. If she did not act immediately, the Alpha King of the Kane Pack would be dead before sunrise. There was one way to save him. It was a technique few Omegas still knew, an old and dangerous method of transferring life force through touch, drawing on her own strength to slow the poison and give his body time to fight. It was forbidden for good reason. It could weaken an Omega permanently, could damage organs, could shorten a life by years. Lyra had read about it in an ancient healer's text long ago, tucked away in the back of the archive room, mostly forgotten. She looked down at Draven's still face. She thought about all the pack members who depended on him, the children who ran to greet him in the courtyard, the elders who trusted his leadership to keep them safe. Whatever he had failed to do for her personally, thousands of lives were tied to his. Lyra placed her palms against his chest and began. The night passed in a blur of exhaustion and pain. She poured her strength into him, hour after hour, watching the dark veins slowly retreat beneath his skin, watching color return to his face bit by bit. By the time the sun rose, her arms were shaking, her vision blurred at the edges, but Draven Kane was breathing steadily, deeply, alive. She used the last of her strength to drag him toward the road, where a passing patrol found them both at dawn. She said only that she had discovered him in the forest and done what she could. Then she asked to be left alone, and disappeared back into the medical wing before anyone could ask more questions. Draven woke 3 days later in his own bed, surrounded by healers and advisors, all relieved and anxious at once. His first question was not about the attack, or about who had poisoned him, or about the state of his kingdom. His first question was who had saved his life. When he learned the answer, he sat in stunned silence. Lyra Ashworth, the Omega his own cousin had rejected in front of the entire pack. The woman his family had dismissed as unworthy, whom he himself had barely noticed in 3 years, walking past her in the halls without a second glance. She had saved him anyway. Draven left his bed earlier than his healers advised, ignoring their protests, and walked to the medical wing himself. He found Lyra changing bandages on an elderly pack member, her movements careful and practiced, her voice low and comforting. He watched her for a long moment before she noticed him standing in the doorway. When she finally looked up, her expression did not soften the way most people's did when the Alpha King appeared. She simply straightened her shoulders and waited, guarded, as if expecting another wound. He thanked her formally, offered her a place of honor within the pack, protection, resources, anything she wanted. He even offered, hesitantly, the mate bond that had never been given to her before. Lyra shook her head. She told him plainly that she had not saved his life for a reward, and she did not want gratitude dressed up as affection. She had done what any healer would do, she said, and she wanted nothing more from him than to be left to her work in peace. Draven left that day feeling strangely unsettled, as though he had been handed something valuable and then watched it slip through his fingers before he understood what it was. He could not stop thinking about her. Over the following weeks, Draven found reasons to visit the medical wing. First it was formal business, checking on the well-being of his people. Then it became less formal. He began arriving without an excuse at all, simply to watch her work, to listen to her speak gently with frightened patience, to notice the quiet strength beneath her soft voice. He saw the way children reached for her hand without fear. He saw the way she stayed long past her required hours, tending to those with no one else to care for them. He saw the calluses on her palms, the exhaustion she never let show on her face, the quiet dignity she carried, despite years of being told she was worth less than everyone around her. Slowly, the image his family had painted of Lyra as weak and unworthy crumbled apart in his mind, replaced by the truth he saw with his own eyes. She was not weak. She had never been weak. She was, in fact, one of the strongest people in his entire pack, and he had simply been too blind, too caught up in old assumptions, to notice. He began to fall for her, not out of guilt, but out of genuine understanding of who she truly was. The pack noticed the change too. Whispers followed the king wherever he went. At first the whispers were doubtful, even cruel, echoing the old dismissal of Lyra as beneath him. But slowly, as stories of her quiet sacrifices spread, the whispers changed. People began to see her differently, remembering small kindnesses she had shown them over the years, realizing how much she had given without ever asking for recognition. Then came the discovery that changed everything. One of the senior healers, examining Lyra during a routine check, found something troubling. Her heart showed signs of severe strain, a kind of damage usually seen only in Omegas who had used the forbidden life transfer technique. When questioned, Lyra finally admitted the truth. She had known, the night she saved Draven, exactly what the technique would cost her. She had done it anyway. The news spread through the castle like wildfire. Draven heard it standing in the middle of a council meeting, and the room seemed to tilt beneath him. He left without a word and went straight to find her. He found her sitting quietly in the herb garden behind the medical wing, sunlight falling gently across her face. When he demanded to know why she had hidden something so serious, his voice cracked with a mixture of anger and grief he had never expected to feel for her. Lyra looked at him calmly, without regret. She told him that if she had explained the cost of the technique that night, he would never have let her use it, and he would have died. She had made her choice with open eyes, she said, and she did not want his guilt now to erase the meaning of what she had done. Draven knelt beside her, taking her hands in his, and told her, for the first time, that he loved her. Not out of debt, not out of guilt, but because of who she truly was, the woman he had come to know over these past weeks. He told her he wanted a real bond between them, one built on choice, not obligation. Lyra's eyes filled with tears, but she still hesitated, wary of trusting a happiness she had never been allowed to have before. As the weeks passed, Lyra's condition slowly worsened. Her strength faded. Simple tasks left her breathless. The pack's most skilled healers gathered, desperate to find a solution, and eventually presented one possibility. Ancient records suggested that a full mate bond between an Alpha King and a dying Omega could stabilize her failing life force, potentially saving her life. It was not a guarantee, but it was the only hope they had. Draven begged her to accept the bond. He knelt before her, no longer as a king, but simply as a man terrified of losing the woman he loved, and asked her to let him save her, the way she had once saved him. Lyra thought carefully before she answered. She thought about the years of rejection, the years of being told she was not enough, the years of learning to stand on her own, because no one else had stood beside her. She thought about what it would mean to accept this bond now, not out of love freely given, but out of desperation to survive. On the day the entire pack gathered to witness her decision, Lyra stood before them all, weak but steady, and spoke with a clear voice that carried across the courtyard. She refused the bond. Gasps spread through the crowd, and Draven's face fell, disbelief and heartbreak plain upon it. But Lyra continued speaking before he could argue. She explained that she loved him, deeply and truly, but she would not let their bond be born from fear of death rather than genuine choice. She wanted him to remember their love as something chosen freely, not as a desperate bargain made at her deathbed. She would rather live her remaining days with dignity and honesty than extend them through obligation. Instead, she asked for something far simpler. She asked for one single day where they could simply be two people, equal in every way, with no titles, no expectations, no old wounds between them. Just Draven and Lyra, nothing more. Moved beyond words, Draven agreed. They spent that day together quietly, walking through the forest where she had first found him, sharing stories neither had told anyone before, laughing softly under the same trees that had once witnessed her saving his life. For those hours, there was no Alpha King and no rejected Omega, only two people who had finally found each other. In the days that followed, Lyra's strength continued to fade, but she remained determined to leave something lasting behind. She spent her final hours teaching young Omegas in the medical wing everything she knew, patiently passing down her knowledge of healing so that her skills would continue helping others long after she was gone. She passed away peacefully one quiet morning, surrounded by the healers she had trained and the patients she had cared for over the years. Word spread through the pack quickly, and by midday, the entire castle had gathered in mourning. At her funeral, something remarkable happened. Alphas, who had once looked down on her, stood with heads bowed. Betas, who had ignored her for years, wept openly. Omegas, she had trained, held each other, grief evident on every face. Even those who had mocked her years before found themselves overcome with sorrow for the woman they had never truly seen until it was too late. Draven stood at the front of the gathering, silent tears falling freely down his face, no longer hiding his grief behind the composure expected of a king. He spoke of her courage, her selflessness, and the quiet strength that had saved not only his life, but had ultimately changed the heart of an entire pack. In the months that followed, Draven passed a new law throughout his kingdom, declaring that no Omega would ever again be dismissed or mistreated because of their rank. He renamed the medical wing in Lyra's honor, ensuring that every person who walked through its doors would remember the woman who had given everything to save others, expecting nothing in return. He never took another mate. Some said he ruled the rest of his years with a quiet sadness beneath his strength, forever shaped by the love he had found and lost too soon. But those who knew him best said he also ruled with newfound compassion, treating every member of his pack, regardless of rank, with the respect Lyra had always deserved and rarely received. Years later, young Omegas training in the medical wing that bore her name would hear her story told again and again, passed down like a legend. They learned that true strength was not found in rank or bloodline, but in the quiet courage to help others, even when no one had ever helped you. And in every corner of the Kane pack, whenever someone spoke her name, they remembered not the Omega who had been rejected, but the woman whose final choice had taught an entire kingdom what it truly meant to love without condition.